And now may I request the author, the great scholar.
Namaskar, and Dovalji, thank you for organizing it, and my dear friend Arun Shoriji for gracing the occasion. Actually, for each of my 4 books, when the publisher said who'd be your, give me a list of 3 people to inaugurate the book, each time actually Arun Shoriji was number 1 choice. So I'm delighted that finally I have that moment, because I feel that he's opened the door. He's the person who's opened the door to original thinking from the Indian point of view with intellectual rigor and courage, and so others like us can then follow. This is Arunji's gift to us. I would like to first locate the book in a bigger framework, starting with what is the relevance of a nation's grand narrative. A nation must have a grand narrative, Mahakahani, something about who we are, where we've come from, why we are together, what we share and cherish, what are our issues, how do we want to go into the future. This sort of a grand narrative, academics call this thing a grand narrative. This can be on several criteria, and we should evaluate what the different nations have used as their criteria, and then see what could be India's grand narrative. And then I will explain to you why, after doing this quick analysis, I will explain to you why I feel that India's grand narrative has to be philosophical unity, what I call the Dharma civilization. That has to be the basis of Indian grand narrative. But let me first give you a few other examples. Japan is a homogeneous race. So their grand narrative is, one race, ethnicity, one language, and so they're all together because of that. And so all the hard work they do as a nation is that this large family, think of it like a jati, huge jati, it is their narrative. In the case of China, it's more uniform language. They used to have many languages, but they standardized on Mandarin because the Mandarin people took over, hegemonically took over many other languages. At one time there were many more languages. And so this uniformity of Mandarin, state policy, everybody must learn Mandarin, is a very strong building block for their narrative. And everyone is required to study initially in Mandarin, while English is a language, it's a second language. It's not a medium of instruction. I had a nice discussion with somebody in Mumbai who writes these editorials for Times of India. He's a very prominent thinker, and he was sitting in the audience, and during the interaction, he said, aren't we lucky that China is also following our example of English, and English is a big asset. Now China is also validating that. And what I had to point out is that in China, Mandarin is the mother tongue, the medium of instruction. English comes as a language that you learn, that you can articulate and speak with other people, but it is not the way you're going to think. Whereas in India, we have, in Punjabi schools are being shut down and turned into English medium schools. This is happening everywhere. So this idea of a uniform language that China has helped them a lot. And they see their origin as Confucian thought, and they say that they are modern, Confucian modernity, not Western modernity. So this is also an interesting point. In the Indian narrative, one of the problems with an Indian narrative is a lot of people think that if you believe in the dharmic civilization, then you have to sacrifice modernity. Whereas if you want to be modern, you better become westernized and reject all those ancient things. In China, they have married the two, and they call it Confucian modernity, which means we are modernizing but not westernizing. This is very interesting. And China has started over 100 Confucian institutes all over the world to propagate their narrative, their grand narrative, through IMAX theaters, through workshops, media briefings, a lot of museums and so on. So if you go around the world, you'll find some are based on a sense of history, like the English feel their Magna Carta, their contributions to the law, to democracy, the royal family, the British Empire. So they have this grand narrative of who we are, and every child learns that. The French teach their children, besides the language, which is compulsory, they teach their children they are the inheritors of the Renaissance, the great European awakening and Renaissance. They are the inheritors of that. So they have a very positive narrative. The Russians have a positive narrative. The Arabs have a grand narrative of who they are. So the question is, what is the Indian grand narrative? And if you ask this question, you get many different answers. You even get a lot of trouble from people who find the question problematic, because they really deep down don't believe in a unified India. They say we don't need a grand narrative. We need there is a Dalit narrative, there is a minority narrative, there is a narrative of Northeast people, or this or that. So it's a lot of little narratives from below that are competing and conflicting with one another, and no grand narrative that can bring them together. Now in the United States, which is also a diverse nation, like India is, has many kinds of people, the importance given to establishing a sense of grandeur of history is huge. It is called, their grand narrative has an official name. It's called American exceptionalism. If you search American exceptionalism, there's a huge narrative on that. They started in the 1800s, and every president who is asked, what is your view on American exceptionalism? And he better say he believes in it, because otherwise why is he president if he's not proud of a great nation? The Christian version has to do with we are the greatest Christian nation, and so on, and there's a narrative based on Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, which is the American religion, and the secular left-wing, left-of-center version is based on we're the most scientific people and the most progressive and greatest amount of accomplishments in all sorts of things, and there's something very special about being an American that makes you very superior. So this idea of American exceptionalism as the grand narrative is encoded in their monuments, big, huge monuments, larger than life in every state capital, in their parades, in their flag, in their anthem. All their sporting events have the national anthem. So they're very proud people. Americans are very proud people. I was having a debate with one of these leftist scholars in Delhi, and he said the problem with America is they don't have a history. And I said, but they have a sense of history. And what matters is not whether you have a history, but whether you have a sense of history. We have a history, but don't have a sense of history. So what matters is whether the history is real. It's what you believe about yourself. Aapki kahani kya hai? It's like corporate brand, which mobilizes all the people. It's like family history. Hamari family kahan se aayi, kya hai, ye wo. So this sense of nation and sense of grand narrative are interlinked. And we haven't had the national debate and discussion on who are we and what is our grand narrative. And I'm hoping that if there's a change in government, one of the projects would be to better document our grand narrative and make it loud and clear. For instance, there is a Ministry of Culture, but instead of, Bollywood and these kind of things, which are important. I'm not saying that pop culture is a bad thing, but pop culture cannot be our grand narrative. The grand narrative is deeper roots in the past, a sense of continuity, a sense of a sense of everybody included in something. So, with that background, what I have developed in this book is what I call the open architecture. That there is a dharmic open architecture in which all sorts of things can belong, like the internet is an open architecture. So many things can come and be members into this system. This is continuous, and as Arunji said, it's evolving, it's not frozen in time, and as Dovaji said, the tree is different every day, and yet it's the same tree. So in that sense, this is evolving, and yet it's the same in its DNA. So this open architecture, in my previous book, Being Different, I had called it integral unity. I called it integral unity and contrasted with synthetic unity. The West is synthetic unity. They don't have this real deep unifying architecture like we do. It's a synthesis of a whole lot of things put together. But I was looking for a Sanskrit term, and I found Indra Jal. Indra Jal in the Atharva Ved, so hence I call it Indra's net. Indra Jal in the Atharva Ved is described as follows, that it's an infinite net of jewels in all directions, where each jewel reflects all the other jewels. That's the cosmos. The cosmos is a collection of jewels, infinite in all directions, where every jewel reflects all the other jewels, which means each of you reflects the whole cosmos. You have, in your body, you have a map of the whole macrocosm. Every electron includes the whole cosmos. Every ant is a mirror or a map of the whole system. So this means that things are inseparable, things are interlinked, things are interpenetrating, interbeing. These are some fancy terms that postmodernists use. But the Atharva idea of Indra is the earliest philosophical representation, philosophical explanation of what the postmodernists are now talking about. Now this Indra idea, or Indra's net, got exported into Buddhism. And I explained this in the book. It became the central paradigm of Buddhism. There is a Avatamsak Sutra in Huayan Buddhism in China. They translated it into Mandarin from Sanskrit, and they quote it. And luckily, they did not distort the word or hide it or modify it and call it, Ming net or some Jing net or something. They call it Indra's net in the Chinese. They call it Indra's net. And so it's referred to the source. And that's very good for me, so I can trace how it's traveled. So this idea of Indra's net becomes a central philosophy of Buddhist interdependency. You know Buddhism as talking about interdependency of everything. And so we know that it's linked with Hinduism, but one of the things I've done in this book is to be able to pinpoint which sutra went where, how it came from the Vedas and where it went into the Buddhism, to show that link very precisely. And from Huayan Buddhism, which is considered China's most advanced philosophical Buddhism, it goes into Japan as Zen, and it goes into Korean Buddhism. And then, when Americans become Buddhists, and became a fashion for a lot of white Americans to become Buddhists, they bring this idea of Indra's net into American thought. So you'll see physicists writing books. If you search, you'll find books called Indra's Net and Chaos Theory, where it's sort of the metaphor for how chaos gets organized. It's a metaphor for holography, a metaphor for quantum physics, Indra's Net. You see Indra's Net being used for environmentalism and ecology, for social harmony, how a lot of diversity can be in social harmony. So Indra's Net became a big thing. But unfortunately, in India, people hardly knew about it. People, when you say Indra's net, people don't know. In fact, one person thought that the book is about Indira Gandhi. He thought that, and he told me that aapka spelling theek nahi hai Indira ka. And he thought this is some kind of, Indira Gandhi must have had some kind of a network, So, and then a journalist from Times of India, a very nice guy, a very senior guy actually, was interviewing me a couple of weeks ago for some article on this. So he started by asking, why are you writing on black magic? So I said, there's nothing to do with black magic. He says, no, but Indra is black magic. So I said, who told you so? So he says, in Times of India, we came up with a comic series and we had Indra about all the Jadoo Tuna. So the amazing thing is that something so grand from our civilization travels around the globe. It goes to Buddhism, China, Japan, then goes to America, and then it is seen as the metaphor for so many great, grand things today in science and philosophy, the whole idea of Indra's net. And yet, in its land of origin, either people don't know it, or they know it in a very negative way, because somebody like Times of India turned it into a pejorative. So one of the reasons I put this on the map is to argue this, or put it on the cover, is to be able to explain to people and give them this insight into what Indra's net is. Before that, I was going to title the book Defense of Vivekananda, because it's his 150th anniversary. And then I expanded the title and was going to call it Defense of Contemporary Hinduism. So now I'll go into what those things are. Why it is the book is actually, why it's called Indra's Net, and it talks about the unity and continuity of the cosmos, of our traditions, and so on, but why it is actually a very strong defense of Swami Vivekananda and contemporary Hinduism. There is it is very interesting that starting in the 1950s, a man named Paul Hacker, as Arunji mentioned, he started a new thesis after 20 years of being a very eminent Sanskrit scholar, very well known, done some very original work in linguistics and so on, Sanskrit linguistics. He started this thesis and he's the one who coined the term Neo-Hinduism. And he said that Hinduism, as defined by Vivekananda and hence all the followers of Vivekananda, is not really authentic because the unity that he talks about is not real, it does not exist in the past. And it's the inferiority complex of Vivekananda from British that caused him to appropriate many Western things and rephrase them in Sanskrit so that Indians would be proud, and this would create a national unity to fight against the British. So he needed something common which didn't really exist, and he needed it to be positive and on par with British ideas. So he came up with this hodgepodge, put it together, put a nice label on it, and to give it a nationalist kind of political spin. And this is how what we call Hinduism started, but more appropriately it should be called Neo-Hinduism. That was his philosophy. And it wasn't taken very seriously right away, but then an American named Hartfuss in University of Pennsylvania, a very eminent Indologist. Most Indians like him a lot. He's written a lot of good things because these people are mixed up. They talk from both sides. So Hartfuss invites this guy to University of Pennsylvania, and he becomes a visiting professor. He gets a lot of importance. And then there is a Viennese called Agehanand Bharati. He had become a monk in India. He'd taken initiation, become a monk, and he wrote a lot of books called The Ochre Robe and so on. He takes this idea and develops it even further, and he turns against Hinduism in his later years, and he gives a lot of weight to this idea of Neo-Hinduism. And then it goes to England, where a minister, an Anglican minister, Ursula King, who's still alive. I think at least a few years ago I met her. She was up in age. She took this idea and gave it a political grounding and said that basically this whole idea she emphasized the political dimension of what Vivekananda was trying to do and tried to show that this is not really a genuine religion, is kind of phony. And the major change that brings this idea to the Indian left, this is what's interesting. It used to be just in the academy, but then she brought an Indian called Anand Rambachan from the Caribbean origin, and he's very well grounded in Advaita Vedanta. He's a scholar of Swami Dayananda Saraswati. He's a student of Swami Dayananda Saraswati. He goes to ashrams and gives talks. Today he's been built up as a very important spokesman and scholar of Hinduism, but at that time he was a young man, and so she gives him a PhD. In his PhD is on how Shankara's Vedanta is violated by Vivekananda. So he gives it a philosophical legitimacy, this Neo-Hinduism, seeing that Hinduism as a fake construct and not very legitimate. He gives it a philosophical grounding, that philosophically speaking, what Vivekananda and future people after that, including Aurobindo, Gandhi, all these guys, what they are calling Hinduism today is not really compatible with Adi Shankara, and comes up with some very sophisticated arguments. Now, from the work of these people, these 4 or 5, each of them given a lot of coverage in my book, and I call that part 1, Purva Paksha, my view of the other side. And then I'm going to refute them in the second part, which I call Uttar Paksha. So these 4 or 5 major figures, they generate a big echo effect in India. The first person is Ramila Thapar, who writes an article, very influential article, called Syndicated Hinduism, in which he says Hinduism, according to these Western people, she doesn't know Sanskrit, she's not a philosopher, she's not capable of either understanding Shankara or understanding Vivekananda, she has no real basis for doing all this, but she's a historian with a lot of political baggage. So she comes up with this article called Syndicated Hinduism, the thesis, and she basically based on these other scholars' work, she's just taking that same thing and giving it a new spin. She says that Hinduism is a syndicated kind of a construction. This syndicate is elitist upper caste Hindus who created this thing to oppress minorities, oppress Dalits, oppress women. And Vivekananda started it, and then the Hindutva people continued taking it further. And this becomes then the talking points of the left, because given Ramana Thapar's power and influence, whole lot of people follow in that lineage. And I have a whole chapter showing, Pankaj Mishra writes this kind of stuff, Jyotirmay Sharma writes this kind of stuff, this Ramachandra Guha writes this stuff, Shashi Tharoor writes these kind of things, Sunil Khilnani, all these kind of guys who are celebrated, big shots, they write this kind of stuff, they get awards. The highly colonized Jaipur Literary Festival, full of these kind of people. So one of the other literary festivals, I was in Bangalore, they were talking to me about my book, and so I told him this is the problem, and he said, "Aapko to literary festival mein jaake you should talk about all this." So I said, "Those people are the ones that I'm exposing, to humko kaise invite karenge?" So he said, "Hamara bhi ek festival hai, hum wahan invite karenge." So he introduced me to this, and this man is a big industrialist, and he's got the clout. So he called the fellow who's running the literary festival in Bangalore, and he said, "You should bring Rajiv in September and have him a major plenary address." And so this young man asked me, he's very excited and all that, and then he asked me, "Ki aapka topic kya hoga?" So I said, "My topic will be decolonizing India's literary festivals." So let's see if the gatekeepers along the way will accept it, but at least first he was very scared, then he said, "Haan, acha hai, karna chahiye." Now, why is it colonized? Because William Dalrymple, sitting in London, runs and controls all the Indian literary festivals except for one or two. He's got a team in every place. The teams are all 100% Indian. They're very sophisticated, which are being promoted. The ideologies and spins which are being legitimized. Ultimate authority is one man sitting in London. What a major power structure that is, and nobody has taken him apart. And I intend to write on this whole thing. So this business of Neo-Hinduism says that Vedanta and Yoga are incompatible. Philosophically and practically, they're incompatible. Traditionally, you could be a Vedantin, never do yoga, or you could be yogi and don't do Vedanta. And Vivekananda has fabricated this unity, and it doesn't really work. This is one of their theses. Another is that Karma Yoga of Vivekananda was a fabrication. Interesting. And in the Gita, their argument is, in the Gita, Karma Yoga is mentioned, but Karma Yoga is for an individual to get moksha. So I am to do Karma Yoga for my moksha, not helping other people. Karma Yoga is not helping other people, but helping myself through as moksha. And this idea of helping other people, according to this thesis, is a Christian idea of charity. And Vivekananda, when he went to America, found that they are doing so much better because they're charitable people. But he wanted to come up with an Indian term and bring Christian charity into India. So he modified the idea of Karma Yoga to include charity, and that's why Karma Yoga is here, but it really doesn't fit into Indian philosophy. Now, one of the Paul Hacker mentions that he's actually saying he knows the exact date when Vivekananda appropriated it, and there is a certain date he cites when Vivekananda is in Bombay, and there is another very famous German Sanskrit scholar called Paul Deussen. Paul Deussen was Schopenhauer's prime student. Schopenhauer was interested in Indian philosophy, and Paul Deussen was a top student, and he was visiting Bombay and he gave a lecture. And because Vivekananda's dates were coinciding, therefore the assumption is that Vivekananda heard the lecture. And because Deussen said something, Vivekananda must have picked it up from there. And because Deussen is a Westerner, therefore it must be a Western appropriation. But when you look at the facts, what Deussen wrote about was, he came up with this idea that Tattvamasi from the Upanishads, you are that, is a fantastic reason to help each other. The basis of love, karuna, compassion, philanthropy is because I am that and you are that. And since we are both the same and we are both divine, so this is the basis for my compassion for you. This is the idea of Tattvamasi. And Vivekananda does have in his writings, he uses the term Tattvamasi ethics. He uses that phrase, Tattvamasi ethics, when he's describing what he calls practical Vedanta, which means Vedanta in action, social action. So because of this link, the claim is being made by the Neo-Hinduism school that the Tattvamasi is some idea that Vivekananda got from Western people. But if you look at Doyson's own works, this is the sort of thing that Arun Shori does a lot, go behind and look at the original source, and you find out that it says something different. So when you look at Doyson's own works on Tattvamasi, Doyson actually criticizes Christianity for not having a philosophy on which charity can be based. Because he says Christians are charitable out of obedience. They've been told you should be charitable. It's out of fear, so they're doing charity to get to heaven. But since they don't have this idea of unity of people, each one being divine, they don't have the principle of immanence, that God is immanent in all of us. God is immanent everywhere. Since they don't have that, therefore their approach to charity is not philosophically grounded. And Doyson proposes that Tattvamasi is something that Christians should import from Vedas in order to have a philosophical basis for charity. So his thesis is actually not he's bringing a Christian idea to us, he's bringing a Vedic idea to Christianity. And so whether Vivekananda got it from him or not is immaterial. The point is it's a Vedic idea, wherever Vivekananda might have picked it up from. So in this manner, I take one point at a time and give my response to it. Now, the last few chapters of the book are where I do something. I'll be attacked for being very aggressive, and I keep that for the last chapter because by then I think I've got the reader in. So wo phas gaya. So now he can do whatever, but I've got enough ideas in him already that now he could do whatever. It doesn't matter. I can really take the risk. So this is where I have. I'm talking about the problem we are facing. The open architecture, being too open, is vulnerable to being co-opted, hijacked, because it allows anybody, and to being digested, what I call digestion, which means, a tiger eats a goat and there is no more goat left because all the parts have been broken down into small atoms and reformed into the tiger's body. So what is left is a strong tiger but no more goat. So we are being digested. Yoga is turning into Christian yoga. Bharatanatyam, they have Christian version of Bharatanatyam. So a whole lot of our ideas are being reformulated as Judeo-Christianity or as Western science. One of the books I'm writing is on Buddhist contributions to neuroscience and cognitive science to show that the cutting edge of neuroscience and cognitive science in the West is based on a lot of Buddhist ideas along with some yoga in Hindu ideas. So this digestion is a serious problem that the open architecture must deal with. So I have remedies in this because I've always been asked what's your remedy. And one of my principles to defend the open architecture, I call it the porcupine defense. Porcupine is an animal that is not aggressive, but it has these quills, and if the tiger tries to swallow him, the tiger will cut his internal organs and may even die. So porcupine is saying, I'm not harming you, but if you try to eat me up, you will kill yourself. So the porcupine defense is a kind of strategy which says, no first strike, I'm not striking you, but if you strike me, you will also self-destruct. And therefore it's a deterrent, it's an interesting kind of deterrent. And I explain how philosophically certain things can serve as porcupine defense, which means that we deter the predator from eating us up. We're not harming him, but we don't want him to harm us. And then related to this is another concept which I call the poison pill. Poison pill is कि मिठाई के अंदर poison डाली है, and you offer it. If it's delicious, the person wants to eat it. When he eats it, he'll be poisoned. So this is the poison. The poison pill is different than porcupine defense in the sense that porcupine defense is very visible and it's a deterrent and he stays away. Poison pill is inside. He doesn't quite know what he's getting into, but as he starts doing yoga, as he starts getting higher and higher experiences, he's not going to believe in this organized church, he's not going to believe in this institution, he's not going to believe that God is somewhere else because he's had an experience. So his ideas of, say, an Abrahamic religion will be poisoned. They will break up. That fixation, he will no longer be in bondage to those kind of ideas, and he will be liberated from the clutches of a church or an institution or what I call history centrism or some kind of an exclusive ideology. So poison pill is a positive thing. It's like Zen koans. It's like the Trishul of Shiva is not negative kind of killing, but it dissolves ignorance. So poison pill actually dissolves the ignorant ego. That is its purpose. So I have in detail explained some of the ingredients of our tradition, which we must never give up, which must be included in teachings of every part of our culture. These principles should be included, because these principles are not digestible into the Abrahamic traditions. And if they are digested, they cause harm to the Abrahamic religion. In other words, there's an incompatibility. And if these principles are taken in and assimilated, then the person no longer can be a Christian or no longer can be a Muslim. So these are poison pill strategies that I leave in this book at the end. And then finally, I have reinterpreted Astika and Nastika. Reinterpreted Astika and Nastika. Many of you would think that Astika means believing in the Vedas and Nastika is not believing in the Vedas. That's only one idea of Astika and Nastika. I show that over history, Astika Nastika has been a debated category. There was a time when Manu believed that people who are who are living a certain lifestyle, certain quality, are Astika. Then Haribhadra, a Jain scholar, came up with Astika as anybody who believes in an afterlife and who believes in virtue and has good ethics. So the idea of Astika as a sort of sense of who we are, and Nastika as the others who are not part of us, the boundaries have been changing. The boundary of us then has existed and it has been changing. So I'm proposing a new Astika today in this book. I'm saying that those who subscribe to the open architecture are Astika. And this requires mutual respect. This requires, I can have any Ishtadevta and so can you. I can't claim mine is the only one. It requires certain principles like that. And I show that the literal interpretation and the fundamentalist interpretation of the Abrahamic religions will not accept Astika, will not want to be in Astika because of the conditions of membership. So it's like you can come, it's an open architecture, but you cannot have hatred for others, you cannot want to undermine others, you cannot be exclusivist, you cannot be like a cancer wanting to have expansion, keep expanding at other people's expense. So as long as you conform to good citizenship, good behavior of the Astika, in other words, you're upholding the values of the open architecture, you're most welcome. You could be any person of any faith, from any part of the world, any historical background. If you comply with this, you can be part of Astika. But if you are going to endanger the open architecture, then you're not. So what I do is, I give the choice to the other side. I'm not evaluating what is Christianity, whether they're good or bad, or Islam, or this or that. I'm saying every individual should make a choice. They can come from that religion. What is their choice in this criteria that I've laid out? And when I was giving a very short snippet of this talk in Mumbai, there was a small gathering, and one very prominent person stood up and said, I have a lot of good friends who are Christians and Muslims. They are very good Indians. They are taxpayers. They support our cricket team. They watch Bollywood movies. They're just like us. They are really good Indians. And they will have a lot of difficulty accepting your criteria of membership. So I said, that means they do not want openness. Because if they want openness, I'm willing to respect them, provided they respect me. What's wrong with that? I've raised the bar. I'm not saying that they have to change their ways. I'm not saying they should stop praying the way they do. I'm saying that they should respect me for being the way I am. And that's all it takes. So where this conversation led to is very insightful. This person says that, look, just because they've been here 1,000 years, even if they cannot accept us, because they're required not to accept us, even if they don't accept us, we should still include them amongst us because they've lived here for a very long time. And even if they are defeating our dharma, even if they are undermining it, we have to respect them because they've lived here for a very long time. So I said, in that case, Sri Krishna is wrong, because why fight the adharma? Why are the Kauravas and Pandavas going to fight? Because those guys are our cousins. They've lived here for a very long time too. Why should we fight them? So I said that according to you, the early doubts of Arjun were valid. And Krishna wasted his time for 18 chapters of the Gita trying to set it right. The early Arjun says, I don't want to fight, they are my cousins and whatnot, whatever they're like, why should I fight, this time. Krishna has to keep arguing that dharma has to be upheld and adharma has to be fought. So according to you, Sri Krishna was wrong. So he thinks about it for a while and he says, well, yes, that's how I feel, and Amartya Sen agrees with me. So we have a very confused intellectual elite. And I'll close with this point that my book intends to provoke a debate and a discussion and arguments on what should be the grand narrative of India, and I propose a foundation for that, intellectual foundation for that, which is based on Dharma civilization as an open architecture that can include everybody that wants to comply with the open architecture and doesn't exclude anybody, but they have to agree to the principles of open architecture and mutual respect. And if they don't, then they are Nastika and they have to be excluded. Thank you.